When James Miller returned from Vietnam in 1971, he brought back more than just his duffel bag and dog tags. He carried invisible wounds that would haunt him for decades. Nightmares, flashbacks, a temper that could ignite like a match to gasoline. I wasn't living, James tells us, his voice weathered but steady. I was just existing, surviving from one day to the next. But sitting across from me today, this 75-year-old veteran with calloused hands holds something unexpected: knitting needles, working methodically through a complex pattern of a winter scarf. "These 2 sticks and some yarn," he says, looking up with clear eyes. "They saved my life when nothing else could." James grew up in a small town in Ohio, enlisted at 18, and by 19 was trudging through the jungles of Vietnam as a combat medic. "We saw things no human should see," he says simply. "And then we were supposed to come home and act normal." That transition proved impossible for James. He tried to slip back into civilian life, working construction and eventually starting a family, but the war followed him. "I'd wake up screaming, soaked in sweat. My wife would find me hiding in the closet sometimes, thinking I was back in the jungle." His marriage couldn't survive the strain. By his mid-30s, James was divorced, estranged from his 2 children, and self-medicating with alcohol. "I was the stereotype," he admits. "The broken vet who couldn't get his act together. I hated what I'd become, but I didn't know how to fix it." The VA diagnosed him with PTSD in the early 1990s, but James found little relief in the therapy sessions or medication. "It was like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound," he says. Nothing touched the real pain. The pivotal moment came in 2008 when James, then 62, suffered a heart attack. During his hospital recovery, an elderly volunteer named Ruth would sit with patients, keeping them company. She was always knitting. "I was bored out of my mind, stuck in that bed," James recalls. "I started watching her hands, how the yarn would transform in her fingers. There was something hypnotic about it." On his 3rd day, feeling particularly restless, James surprised himself. "I asked her to teach me," he says, chuckling at the memory. "She looked shocked, this gruff old vet wanting to knit. But she just smiled and said, 'Honey, I thought you'd never ask.'" Ruth brought him a set of large wooden needles and thick blue yarn the next day. "My hands were shaking. Not just from the meds, but from feeling so vulnerable. Here I was, a man who'd been in combat, terrified of looking foolish with some yarn. His first attempts were, by his own admission, a disaster, but something unexpected happened. For those minutes, I was concentrating on the stitches, trying to remember what Ruth had shown me. My mind went quiet. The memories, the anxiety, it all stepped back just a little. That was the first moment of real peace I'd felt in almost 40 years. What James discovered through knitting wasn't just a hobby. It was a form of therapy that science is only now beginning to understand. Repetitive, creative activities like knitting engage multiple areas of the brain simultaneously, creating what neurologists call a flow state. "I didn't know any of that fancy brain stuff," James says. "I just knew that when I was counting stitches and following patterns, I wasn't reliving firefights or jumping at shadows." Research now shows that crafting activities like knitting can lower heart rate and blood pressure, reduce harmful stress hormones like cortisol, and release dopamine and serotonin, natural mood boosters. For seniors especially, these hobbies for brain health provide critical cognitive exercise. Dr. Melissa Chen, a neuropsychologist who specializes in trauma and aging, explains that activities like knitting are particularly valuable for PTSD sufferers. The bilateral stimulation, using both hands in a rhythmic pattern, has similarities to EMDR therapy, which we use to help process traumatic memories, she says. Plus, creating something beautiful and functional gives a sense of control and accomplishment, which directly counteracts the helplessness associated with trauma. For James, the benefits extended beyond those quiet moments with his needles. I started sleeping better. Not perfect, but better. The nightmares didn't stop completely, but they came less often. As his skills improved, James found himself venturing out to a local yarn store. First time I walked in, it was like being in enemy territory, he laughs. All these women looked at me like I was lost. But the shop owner, a woman named Diane whose father had also served in Vietnam, welcomed him warmly. She invited him to join their Thursday evening knitting circle. I thought she was crazy, James admits. Me, sitting around with a bunch of ladies knitting. But I was lonely enough to try anything once. That first Thursday, James sat stiffly in the circle, focusing intently on his stitches and saying little. But week after week, he returned. Gradually, the rhythmic clicking of needles and gentle conversation became a lifeline. These women didn't care about my past. They didn't tiptoe around me like I was broken. They just wanted to know if I was using merino or alpaca for my next project. The knitting circle became James's first real community since leaving the service. We were different ages, different backgrounds, but we spoke the same language in our hands. When James shared his story of PTSD with the group months later, their response changed him. No one pitied me. Instead, they shared their own struggles: cancer, loss, divorce. We were all using these needles to stitch ourselves back together in some way. After 5 years of dedicated knitting, James had become quite skilled. He specialized in complex cable patterns, the more challenging, the better for keeping my mind occupied, and had begun giving away his creations. One Christmas, he made a bold decision. He found his daughter's address and mailed her a package containing a hand-knit blanket in her favorite colors from childhood, purple and teal. With it, he included a letter explaining how knitting had helped him face his demons and expressing his regret for the years lost. I didn't expect anything back, James says, his voice growing quiet. I just wanted her to have something I'd made with my hands, something that showed I'd been thinking of her with every stitch. 2 weeks later, his phone rang. It was Sarah, his daughter, now with children of her own. She told me her kids wanted to meet the grandpa who made the magic blanket, James recalls, wiping his eyes. That blanket opened a door I thought was closed forever. Today, James teaches his grandchildren to knit during their regular visits. My grandson Ethan is better at it than I was at the start, he says proudly. Kids don't have the same hang-ups about what boys should or shouldn't do. Word of James's transformation spread through the local VA, and in 2015, a social worker approached him about starting a knitting group specifically for veterans. I thought it was a long shot, James admits. I figured most vets would rather eat their boots than try knitting. But to his surprise, men and women from different eras of service, Vietnam, Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan, began showing up. Some came reluctantly, urged by therapists or spouses. Others were simply curious. The first few sessions were awkward, James recalls. Lots of jokes about grandma hobbies and fumbling with the needles. But you know what? They kept coming back. The group, which James named Knit Through It, has become one of the most successful supplemental therapy programs at the VA Center. Over 80 veterans have participated, with many reporting significant improvements in their PTSD symptoms. One guy, a Marine who served in Fallujah, told me he stopped having to take his sleep medication. James says. Another said knitting was the only thing that helped him sit through his kids' baseball games without scanning for threats the whole time. The unique senior hobby has proven particularly valuable for older veterans who didn't receive proper PTSD treatment in their younger years. For guys my age, we were told to suck it up, James explains. We didn't have the language for what we were experiencing, let alone effective treatments. Many in the group have expanded to other fiber arts, crochet, weaving, even spinning their own yarn. They donate many of their creations to homeless shelters and children's hospitals. There's something powerful about taking your pain and transforming it into something that comforts someone else, James reflects. It's healing in a way that's hard to put into words. James's story has inspired similar programs across the country. He's been invited to speak at VA hospitals and mental health conferences about the role of creative hobbies in trauma recovery. I'm not saying knitting is a miracle cure, he cautions. I still have bad days. I still see a therapist and take medication. But knitting gave me a tool I didn't have before, a way to be present in the moment instead of trapped in the past. The scientific community has taken notice. Several research studies now focus specifically on the therapeutic benefits of knitting for PTSD, with James's group participating in a longitudinal study through the University of Michigan. They hook us up to all these monitors while we knit, James laughs, measuring our heart rates and brain waves. It's a bit silly, but if it helps others, I'm all for it. The preliminary results are promising, showing significant reductions in hypervigilance and improved sleep quality among participants who knit regularly. For seniors staying sharp through retirement, the cognitive benefits are particularly noteworthy: improved memory, enhanced concentration, and delayed onset of dementia symptoms. My doctor says my brain looks younger than my age on the tests, James says with pride. Not bad for a guy who couldn't remember his own phone number some days because of the PTSD fog. Now, knitting is as essential to James's daily routine as brushing his teeth. First thing in the morning, I sit with my coffee and knit a few rows. It sets the tone for the day, reminds me I have this tool if things get rough. He carries a small project with him everywhere, simple socks or dishcloths that can be worked on without much concentration. If I feel myself getting triggered in public, I can step aside and work a few stitches. Brings me right back to center. The physical benefits have been substantial too. The fine motor skills required have helped with the arthritis in his hands, and the sense of purpose keeps him active despite the challenges of aging. A lot of guys I served with, they've given up. They sit in front of the TV all day, just waiting for the end. I've got projects planned out for the next 10 years, he says with a smile. I've got reasons to keep going. And that might be the biggest gift of all. As our conversation winds down, James finishes a row on the scarf he's been working on throughout our interview. A gift for his great-granddaughter's first birthday next month. The pattern is complex, cables intertwining like the threads of his life story. If you'd told me 50 years ago that knitting would save my life, I'd have laughed in your face, he says, carefully placing his work in a leather project bag. But that's the thing about healing. It rarely comes from where you expect it. James's journey reminds us that it's never too late to find a new path forward, that even the most unexpected hobbies can become powerful tools for transformation. For seniors seeking ways to stay sharp and engaged, his story offers compelling evidence that creative pursuits provide essential cognitive exercise while nurturing the spirit. I don't know what happens after this life, James reflects, but I know that in this one, I found my way back to living through these 2 sticks and some string. And if sharing that helps even one other person find their way back too, well, that makes every stitch worth it. If you're struggling with trauma, depression, or simply looking for a meaningful way to keep your mind active as you age, consider exploring a creative hobby like knitting. As James has shown us, these unique senior hobbies offer far more than just a pleasant pastime. They can become a lifeline to better brain health, emotional well-being, and a renewed sense of purpose. And if you're already a knitter, consider reaching out to your local veterans organizations or senior centers to share this healing craft with others. Sometimes, the most powerful medicine comes wrapped in the simplest packages. The mind is like yarn, James tells me as we part ways. It can get tangled and knotted, but with patience and the right tools, you can work it into something beautiful. That's what I want people to remember. No matter how tangled your life feels, there's always a pattern waiting to emerge.